Hello, in this video I'm revisiting a location which I last visited 2 years ago. I recorded a video here on June 20th in 2020 and it's entitled River Cut Bank and Point Bar near Greeley, Colorado. And I wanted to film this video here today to give you a sense of how quickly do rivers migrate. And I encourage you to watch that video and other videos where I discuss river processes along the Poudre River that we see here to give you some background. But in a nutshell, rivers have meanders or curves like we see here. The outside of the curve receives more erosion because in high water events, the fastest velocity water travels on the outside of the turn, thus removing more sediment and cutting the bank back. This is called the cut bank, and on the other side is the point bar where sediment is deposited because stream velocities are lower there. And why I wanted to revisit this location is that in that video I made a prediction that within 10 years the migration of this meander would destroy a bench and eventually the Poudre Trail, a bike trail that we see to my left. The 10-year guess, it was just a guess, but as the years have gone on, we get a better sense of how quickly is this meander migrating, because they have since removed the bench. Where the two concrete footings were are now little holes which are protected by these cones. So the bench used to be here. For that video I was standing somewhere over here, and that spot is now gone, and in fact I tried to place the camera in the same location and I couldn't because that material has been eroded away. So it's a very clear amount that has been cut back in the 2 years. And today is July 3rd, 2022, so almost exactly 2 years later. And so I'm going to pull out a tape measure and I'm going to measure from the Poudre Trail straight through the bench to the bank and determine what that distance is. And then from the previous video, I'm going to estimate at what that distance was based on my height, which we assume hasn't changed in the last 2 years. So I'm going to make two measurements here. One is going to be from the Poudre Trail to the edge of the bank, and then also from the Poudre Trail to where the bench once was, right in between the two concrete fittings. I'm going to measure perpendicularly from the bench, and perhaps in a few years' time I'll come back and remeasure to see how much the bank has cut back in those 2 years. So the measurement from the edge of the trail to the bank is 374 centimeters. And now from the bench to the trail, (256 centimeters.
So on the right, we see the measurements taken at the study site. 256 centimeters between where the bench once was and the Poudre Trail, 374 centimeters between the bank and the trail, which leaves us currently 118 centimeters between the bench, or where the bench once was, and the bank. Using my height as a constant, we're going to estimate what the distances between the bench and the bank were when I shot the first video in 2020. And I estimated to be about 472 centimeters between the bench and the bank at that time. So here we see the math showing us that there's been 354 centimeters of cutback on that cut bank. From when the first video was shot to the update video, it was 743 days. And so we can do just a quick graph here where it's on the x-axis we have days of 743 days and 354 centimeters of cutback, And we can draw a line through that, and the slope of that line gives us the rate of cutback per day. 354 centimeters divided by 743 days gives us about 0.5 centimeters per day. And of course, that is an average rate. But from that average rate, we can estimate how long it will take for the cut bank to reach the Poudre Trail. Well, if we take 374 centimeters and we divide our average rate, here specifically 0.476 centimeters per day, that gives us 786 days. With 365 days per year, that gives us about 2.2 years until the bank reaches the Poudre Trail. Based on the time when that video was shot, the estimation is that the bank will reach the Poudre Trail about September 2024. Of course, we have to remember that this is an average rate because we only have 2 points. The reality is that the bank cuts back most at high water events, particularly when the river is at what's called bank full or is at the top of the bank. And that's shown by steep drops on the lower graph. But then there's long periods of time where we don't have high water, and there's very little cutback, shown by the approximately horizontal lines on the lower graph. We know that the bank will eventually undercut the Poudre Trail, causing it to collapse into the river, such as this reach that we see here. And there's lots of ways to manage this problem. Here we see another reach where we see that the cut bank is now very close to the Poudre Trail, and a fence has been put up and a very minor reroute is put in place just to move the trail a little farther away from the cut bank. One of the management strategies is to put down what's called riprap. And so in the distance on the right along the stream bank, you see there's a section where boulders have been placed. Those boulders require a very high velocity in order to move them, and so they are a way to stabilize the bank and decrease or stop the amount of bank cutback. Here we can see more riprap, but also a section of corrugated steel has been placed to, again, stabilize the cut bank and minimize the amount of bank cutback. Here the amount of cutback was enough that it did impact the trail, and so the trail was simply rerouted, but with this jog away from the area that the bank had been impacted. This is the same location, and you can see here willow trees have been planted, and also cottonwoods are now beginning to grow in the area. And this vegetation can behave a lot like the riprap and stabilize their bank, thus minimizing the amount of cutback.